We are privileged once again to bring to the microphone our good friend Max Lucado, of course, an individual that has written about 120 copies of different books, videos, children's books, and a variety of other resources in 54 different languages. Has been dubbed many times as America's pastor, a graduate of Abilene Christian University, where they have the Max Lucado collection, and I might point you to that. And this new book, which is God Never Gives Up on You, What Jacob's Story Teaches Us About Grace, Mercy, and God's Relentless Love. It is published by our good friends at Thomas Nelson. And Max Lucado, always a delight to have you in the program.
Well, the only thing I regret is that I'm not sitting there in the studio with you. I really enjoy seeing you and saying hello to your wonderful team. So forgive me for not being there in person, but this is the second best thing. It's great to hear your voice.
And I might, first of all, ask our listeners, do you consider yourself part of the Super Saint Association, or probably more likely, the Tilted Halo Society? And as you get into this book, you'll understand it only so well. But Max, you and I both have talked about the sermons. Yours has been probably better known than any of mine, but I did one years ago on the broken branches of your family tree, in which you talk about Abraham and Jacob and Isaac and Joseph. And, of course, we're going to focus on Jacob here, but if you are convinced that you have no problems, well, you probably don't want to listen. But if for all the rest of us, this book and this conversation is for them, isn't it?
Yeah, we love these Old Testament characters. We love all the characters in the Bible. We just can't say often enough, God, thank you for telling us these stories. That the Bible is more than just a list of moral behaviors or testimonials, but it's a picture of people, some who have walked the path of faith well, others who could have done better, but God used each and every one of them to accomplish His will. And Jacob, I think, is just one of the sterling examples of how God uses imperfect people to accomplish His perfect plan.
And again, you and I are older, so you might have run into this. I don't run into it as much with younger people because they don't really know as much about the Bible. But I used to run into people sometimes who knew enough about the Bible to be dangerous and say, well, I don't want to read the Bible. It's all about good people. I said, have you read the book of Genesis? You know, Cain and Abel, Noah, the Tower of Babel. Then we get into Abraham and Jacob and Isaac. And you just go through this long, long list. And as you point out, we really only know about, in round numbers, about 20 years of the life of Jacob, but they aren't exactly the kind of thing that you would run if you were to write your own autobiography, because you'd try to talk about the positive things. Oftentimes we talk about Facebook as being just the highlight reel, but this is hardly the highlight reel of Jacob, is it?
That's true. Can I give the listener, I know everybody probably has the context, but just in case someone doesn't, Jacob is the grandson of Abraham, and of course this is important because God made a covenant with Abraham to bless the world through his lineage, through his family tree, and how he has done it. Through the lineage of Abraham, we have the Psalms, we have the prophets, we have amazing stories like Esther and Daniel. Of course, we have Jesus Christ, our Savior, and the hope of heaven, Jesus who died on the cross for us and rose from the dead, and right now sits at the right hand of the Father and is preparing to come and redeem us. And so God made a promise to Abraham, and He kept that promise. He's keeping that promise. We who are Gentiles are blessed by God's use of this Jewish man and the Jewish people. And Jacob was one of them. So Jacob is Abraham's grandson, and he is the son of Isaac and Rebekah. And Isaac and Rebekah had twins, Esau and Jacob. And Esau was the older by a second, just a fraction. They were twins, and Jacob came out second. Esau was the firstborn, and that's a really fascinating and important factor in ancient Israel. That meant that he would inherit the clan. He'd be the leader of the clan, inherit more of the wealth. And yet God told Rebekah that the older will serve the younger, and yet rather than wait on God to make that happen, Jacob and Rebekah did what we like to do, and the story begins with Jacob and Rebekah taking matters into their own hands. And just real quickly, sells the birthright to Esau sells the birthright to Jacob. Jacob lies. He deceives his father. Esau wants to kill Jacob, and then off and running we are. And we follow Jacob up through Mesopotamia, through Laban, through 2 wives, 2 handmaidens, back down to a re-encounter with Esau, but not before he encounters God at Jabbok, and then on down through Shechem, which is the darkest season of Jacob's life. And finally, he's back at Bethel. And through it all, Kerby, through it all, I don't think Jacob does anything that's truly noteworthy. But God honors him. He honors him. And so the summary statement is that God is the hero of the Jacob story. It's not Jacob, but God is. And for those of us who can relate to Jacob, we find that grace wonderfully assuring.
Again, 12 chapters, which start with the Tilted Halo Society and work our way down through ladders from heaven and walking with a limp and a trickster who then gets tricked himself. A series of other stories, of course, the darkness of Shechem. But at the very end, do you know this grace? So it is a wonderful story in terms of how we that maybe have some very significant limitations in our lives, sin and other actions and poor decisions that we've made. This is really a story for us as well. And I might just mention that though this is a 200-page book, really, the content's about 140 plus pages. The rest are questions for reflection, which were prepared by Andrea Lucado. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So if you are finding yourself saying, well, I'd like to read this, but this might be certainly a great Bible study that we could do together, you have everything you need. It's sort of plug and play so that you can read, you can have reflection, you can have discussions, and it's all part of this new book. And I think you will certainly benefit from not only the spiritual insight from these chapters in the book of Genesis, but also the stories that Max tells about himself and draws conclusions that you can apply to your own life. And since you started out with, of course, the classic illustration of Jacob and Esau, in your chapter on Prince to Palooka, you talk about how, again, it is a sin not to wait on God and to take matters in your own hands, and in some cases to cut corners ethically. And you use a story, and again, one of the things I love about you, Max, is you tell your own problems, difficulties, decisions that you've made. But this one, I guess we have to explain to our younger listeners, involves payphones. I think even younger people know what a payphone is, but they probably saw them in some movies. But there was a time when you and I were communicating with our girlfriends, who became our wives, or at least my case did, and we had used payphones. But you found a way to cut some corners, didn't you?
You know what? When I told this story at our church, about 50% of the people got it, and about 50% the younger folks, and it just didn't dawn on me, Kerby. I mean, I tried to offer a word of explanation, but it really has changed, hasn't it? How we communicate.
It is.
With a long distance call, the idea of being charged for a long distance call is just obsolete. But still, I think the story represents, and yeah, I tell all my own stories because I've got so many of them. But so here I was, a student at Abilene Christian, and I had a crush on a girl who was at a college in East Texas, and we couldn't see each other. It was too far of a drive. So I would call her all the time, but that got expensive. And so I came up with this idea, Kerby. It was my how do you say the word, prepubescent brain, or underdeveloped brain. I started charging the calls to a vacuum cleaner store. Just pulled somebody and randomly out of the phone book, which kids don't know what a phone book is either. and I just started charging. And what makes me think I could get by with that? What makes me think I could? And sure enough, I got caught. Got in trouble, found myself in the shop writing a check for all those calls and learning a lesson that you don't take shortcuts in life. And I tell that story because I think that what Jacob and Rebekah were doing was just taking a shortcut.
Yes.
God had told Rebekah, the younger will rule over the older. She didn't want to wait and figure out and let God do it, so she took matters into her own hands, and that led to one disaster after another. You've probably seen that a time or two.
I certainly have, and I love the fact that you summarized that because, again, Rebekah and Jacob got what they wanted, but at what cost? The family was splintered. He was without a home. He had to run for his life. His twin wanted to kill him. That's Esau. He had betrayed his father's trust, and he, as far as we know, never saw his mother again. And a lesson that we need to pass on for individuals that want to cut corners right now. I mean, we have indictments, we have impeachments, we have all sorts of stories of corruption here and everywhere, and maybe some of our listeners can learn a vicarious lesson of what happens when you cut some corners. So just a very powerful chapter, but I'll keep it moving because I want to see if we can cover all 12. And that one gets us to ladders from heaven. You know, lots of times people would actually say, I'm climbing Jacob's ladder, but even there are some incredible stories. We know very little about some of the background of Jacob, but what we do know is interesting as well in terms of what God was calling for Jacob to do and how he seemed to always be missing the mark.
It's a beautiful portrait of grace, too. I mean, by this point, Jacob is skedaddle. Rebekah told him, get out of town. Esau's got that look in his eyes, got a dagger in his hands. And so Jacob takes off with nothing, so dead broke. And remember, he's the son of Isaac and the grandson of Abraham, and we know they're rich, but he's dead broke. And he goes out and he doesn't have anything even to sleep on. He wrestles up a rock for a pillow. And as he's sleeping, he has this beautiful dream, this vision of a ladder from heaven coming down, and angels descending and angels ascending, and God is at the top of it. I'd love your take on this, Kerby. The big takeaway for me is that Jacob's done nothing to warrant this beautiful vision of God's presence, and yet God shows up and says, I'm with you. I'm going to keep that covenant I made. And it's a portrait of grace.
Certainly is. And in some respects, chapter 3 points to the last chapter, chapter 12, where you talk about grace as well. So even while this story is unfolding, you can see God's grace. And again, just so many great illustrations that we should apply to this day. But I thought we might also talk about, and it wouldn't be a good Kerby Anderson talk without at least a little bit of Latin, no quid pro quo. And what you're talking about here is that, again, we sometimes make a deal with God. You talk about a deal that you were making with. And again, to understand this, people need to understand that you have been for so many years in the past a missionary to Brazil. But a lot of this came as a crisis when your father was diagnosed with ALS. And you sort of, if you will, made a deal with God on a sheet, but there was really only one signature on their sheet, wasn't it?
Only one signature, yeah. Quid pro quo, that phrase got famous in the political world just a few years ago, too. But quid pro quo means I do this for you, you do that for me, tit for tat. And I did. And I look back and well, here's what happened. Daddy was diagnosed with ALS. I was 27 years old, and I was planning to move to Brazil. My wife and I were planning to move to Brazil. I told Dad I won't go to Brazil. Dad said, no, you should go. And I went. I moved to Brazil, but I would make trips back every year to see him. And on one occasion, we were called back on emergency because Dad was nearing the end. And I was angry at God, Kerby. I was angry at God because in my mind, I had made a deal with God. I'll go to Brazil. I'll leave my father's bedside and I'll go to a distant land and I'll be a missionary. But you know what? You need to heal my dad. You just need to heal my dad. And there was part of me that just felt like that was right. That was fair. But he didn't. He didn't. He didn't heal my father this side of eternity. He healed him across the other side, but and I was mad. And so there was an occasion when I went out to West Texas where I grew up, and I had seen my dad in the hospital. And it was a cold December night. I drove out in the West Texas oil fields. It was a dry, cold night, and I walked around outside near a pump jack, and I was shaking my fist at heaven, saying, God, you haven't done your part. But even then in my heart, I knew God doesn't operate like that. He doesn't operate like that. The reason I told that story is because Jacob did that.
Yes, he did.
Jacob, having had that beautiful moment where he saw the ladder from heaven, instead of just being grateful, he set about negotiating with God. He said, okay, I will, if you'll watch over me, if you'll take care of me, if you get me back to Bethel, then I will call you my God, and I will give you 10% of what I own. What that does, Kerby, I think that's a pretty dangerous posture to take, because we reduce God down to someone with whom we can negotiate. that he needs something that I have. That's a small view of God. Yes. And of course, God didn't sign that contract with Max. He didn't sign it with Jacob. It's God's job just to be God, and it's our job just to trust.
I love your writing. Anytime we suggest that we control spiritual dividends from God, that God is a genie who awaits our rub on the lamp, that God is an ATM who dispenses goodness if we enter the correct PIN, that God is a sky fairy who is under obligation to do what we want because we have thrashed out a deal with him, we border on heresy. We've exchanged a transcendent God to whom we're accountable for a dependent God who's accountable to us, the result of a transactional faith. Just a great wordsmithing that you do so often. Been talking about Jacob, who planted seeds of deceit, and now we're going to see that he harvests a crop of deceit. He may have fooled Esau and Isaac, but now he gets fooled by Laban. And it's interesting, Max, because Jacob thought he was going there to meet his uncle and marry a wife. But as you say, he went there so Jacob could step on the scales, and you start the chapter by saying that all of us sometimes look down at the scales and go, that can't be right. Look at the mirror and say, no, that's making me look too fat. But sometimes you step on the scales and it's giving you an accurate reading, and you use this idea of scales to say it's about time for him to take a self-assessment and step on the scale and see who he really is.
Yeah, Jacob, in God's itinerary, it's time for Jacob to have a good look in the mirror, and that's what he got. That's what he got. It's a striking contrast or comparison that everything that Jacob did, Jacob received in the hands of Laban. Again, just in case listeners forgot the story, it is wouldn't you agree it's one of the most colorful stories in the Bible?
Yes. 7 years and 7 years. Yeah, go ahead.
7 years and 7 years, and then another 6.
Yeah.
He ends up 20 years there, but he goes to be with his uncle, meets Laban's daughter, Rachel, falls head over heels in love with her, and then negotiates a deal. And I can just see Laban, the horse trader, and Jacob, the horse trader, hammering this out. And finally, they end up at 7 years, and he's going to work for 7 years to get to marry Rachel. And then on the night of his wedding, ends up sleeping with Leah. And who knows how this happened? Who knows? And nobody knows. I mean, one explanation is the word feast there can mean drunken party. And that seems likable. I mean, possible. Maybe everybody was so drunk that Jacob didn't realize it. I know that the bride wore a heavy veil, but that veil had to come off. So something happened, though, and Jacob ended up consummating the marriage, not with Rachel, but with Leah. And he got tricked. Leah was the older sister. Apparently, she was not quite as attractive as Rachel. And so he had to negotiate a new deal, work 7 more years to get Rachel. And everything that, he tricked his family, now his family tricks him. He ended up with the short end of the stick. I mean, he gave Esau the short end of the stick. Now he gets the short end of the stick. He gets tricked. He tricked. Now Jacob gets tricked. And I think there's a principle here, Kerby. I'd love to know your thoughts. It sounds to me like, God is not mocked.
That's right.
And what we reap, we will sow. Jacob was a recipient of God's great grace. But just because we receive God's grace doesn't mean, that we don't have the consequences. If I make a mess of my decisions today, I'll pay the price tomorrow. God will still forgive me. He'll still love me. He doesn't smudge my name out of the book of life. But if I disobey him today, he'll let me feel the heavy consequences of that in my life. And that's a fair warning.
Yes. And again, I think the biblical phrase so often is sowing and reaping. Now, you've had some people that are looking at it from a secular world and they say, well, isn't karma a terrible thing? Sometimes use a different word, as well as I do. But it's the same kind of idea. You see individuals that oftentimes sow deceit. Sooner or later, they get deceived themselves. You see somebody who sows corruption. Eventually, corruption comes back and snaps back on them. And I think the biblical phrase is not the idea of karma. The biblical idea is that there is sowing and weeping, and God is not mocked. And maybe jumping ahead, since we talked about Laban, I love how you start this chapter. Let's talk about the Laban in your life. Well, I know I'd rather not, because we're talking about every person I have ever met has somebody like Laban, somebody who's difficult, maybe deceptive, maybe they're conniving, maybe they're manipulative, maybe they're just overbearing, but they are one way or another a difficult person in your life. And I'm glad that you devoted a chapter there, because I think people might be able to relate to that chapter as much as any of the chapters there, even if you take the focus off of my need to recognize that I'm part of that tilted halo society. Sometimes we also like to look at the other person that put us in that position in the first place.
Yeah, and Jacob got himself in this mess. But in our world, I know people, it seems like they didn't do anything, but they just ended up in a work situation or a school situation or some type of society, like a Boy Scout or Girl Scout society, or even a church where you end up having to work with, interact with somebody who just really brings the worst out in you, or who is out to get you, or who's out to manipulate you. I don't know if it's just me, Kerby, but I seem like I'm reading more and more articles about narcissism.
Right.
And people who are on a scale of narcissism. And a narcissist has no empathy, and a narcissist only cares about themselves, and they have a false bravado, a grandiosity about them. I think a person who lands on that spectrum, however it is, would be a Laban. I mean, they are out to use us to accomplish their means, and it's not an easy life at all. And so how do we respond? You have any thoughts about that narcissism comment?
I do. And what's so interesting is we have, over the last couple of months and even years, and a matter of fact, I know that a lot of people have benefited so much from some of the work that you have been doing in the past when we had the pandemic and the lockdown. There were times when you were really encouraging people to take some of the resources and books that you had put together and all the rest. And that same thing, we have decided, Max, to probably do more programs on emotional issues. And it occurred to me the other day that while we were talking about all the problems, I now have a booklet coming out which is based on some of the interviews we've done with Chris Thurman on what a good and godly self-esteem and healthy, godly kind of emotional balance looks like, because we are seemingly seeing a rise in anxiety, a rise in suicidal ideation, and also it just seems like all of a sudden, maybe they always were out there, both those narcissists are coming out of the woodwork like we've never seen before. And I think that is all the more reason for us, number one, as Christians to recognize some of the characteristics of that. An individual that may be trying to manipulate you like Laban was is not going to be good. You are well familiar with, of course, Henry Cloud and others, John Stowe, and all the people that have written about boundaries. I just think there's just going to be real need in the Christian world as the world becomes more secular and even more dark for us to be able to put boundaries up and use biblical principles to deal with some of those Labans in our life.
The key word I heard, secular. Secular. If we're in a society where there is no God, then we become God, right?
Right.
And we inflate ourselves, and we have to promote ourselves, and we have no God before whom we bow, to whom we're accountable, and that's just a feeding ground for narcissism. So I think it's going to only increase. Lisa TerKeurst released a book, Goodbye and Good Boundaries, that I'd strongly recommend. We're going to have to really work through this topic for many people. Not by any coincidence, just an hour ago, I'm up at the church office. I ran into someone who had been at our church to visit with a counselor, and I know her well. I said, "How are you doing?" She said, "Well, I'm working through boundaries." Through boundaries, wow. You know, and I think the Laban discussion fits right into that, you know. And so, what do you do if you got a Laban in your life? Just 2 or 3 good ideas, I think. Number one, thank God for them. Thank God for them. Count it all joy, my brethren, when you face various trials and tribulations, because these develop the faith within us. And so, yeah, it's hard, but thank God for them. Pray for them. Pray for them. You could be the person that quickens a desire for that Laban to love God. And then number 3, don't get pulled down to a Laban level. Don't let Laban pull you down to his level. And if you feel like you can't be in community with that Laban without getting pulled down to his level, then it's probably best to put boundaries up. And I know that can get very particular if it's a family issue. So I won't even try to get into that. That should be done with a counselor. But there are times in which it's better to change jobs, change neighborhoods, change cities, rather than try to live with that Laban.
And whenever I mention Max Lucado, one of the questions I get so often is, well, how is his health? And I thought that relates very much to the chapter on face-to-face with yourself, because as you point out, life comes with inflection points. And at a time when everybody probably thought everything is going well, you have, if you go to some of the list of popular San Antonio attractions, your church is on there. Magazine Christianity Today sent a reporter to do a profile, called you America's pastor. Matter of fact, Reader's Digest designated you the best preacher in America. Sermons turned into books, all sorts of opportunities. So what could go wrong? Well, the staff are struggling, the department's squaring off against each other, tacky emails. I'm in leadership, so I understand this only so well. Intramural squabbles. And then your heart has the rhythm of a Morse code message, irregular and inconsistent. Your cardiologist diagnoses you with atrial fibrillation, puts you on medicine to slow down, but you can't slow down. Staff needs you. The pulpit requires you. The publisher is counting on me. The entire word is looking at me. So in some respects, you had to come face to face with yourself, and that's the title of that chapter.
And what I saw, I didn't like, Kerby. Just to be straightforward answer, but this was when I was about 51 years old, so it's been about 18, 19 years now. But instead of dealing with that stress in the way I had told people to deal with stress, through prayer, through Bible reading, through trusting God's promises, I dealt with that stress by drinking. And I had problems with drinking before I became a Christian. And that old proclivity resurrected its head. And I began to find a convenience store every day. On the way home from work, I'd go to another part of town, and I'd buy one of those, Kerby big cans of beer. And I would sit in the parking lot of the convenience store and drink it just to take the edge off the day. And I know some of your listeners are going, what? what was he doing? I said, yeah, I'm not proud of that. It was an inflection point in my life. It was a time in which I either needed to be honest with God or quit playing or get myself in trouble. And I tell that story because that's what happened to Jacob.
Yes.
And Jacob had a come to Jesus moment, even though he lived long before Jesus. In my case, I felt God talk to me one of those days in the parking lot. This lasted for about a month. And I felt God talk to me saying, and then I was saying, Lord, I got it together. It was a wrestling match, just like Jacob wrestled with God. And he was saying, if you got it together, what are you doing, hiding in a convenience store parking lot? And it was a conviction, and I needed to come clean. And our church has a board of elders, as many do. And I went to the elders and wonderful friends, wonderful men. And I just told them everything. And they gathered around me and prayed. We put together a new plan of action to help take some of the load off of me. I shared it with the church, and that led to some wonderful conversations. But I think, what if I'd gone the other path, which I could so easily have done. But God was gracious, as he always is. And the story there fits so well, I think, with Jacob's story, although Jacob's was far more dramatic. Mm-hmm. He wrestled with God all night. He thought he had actually pinned God at one point, and God just touched him on the hip and left him with a limp for the rest of his life.
Yes.
But then he said, what's your name? And Jacob said, Jacob. And then God said, I'm going to call you Israel.
That's right.
Yeah, you've been a cheater, a swindler, but I'm going to give you a new name. I'm going to call you Israel. And God gave me the new name, Forgiven. And I cherish it. But anyway, yeah, we've all been there, or at least I've been there. So
well,
I can relate.
I love that. Again, your name will no longer be Jacob. From now on, you will be called Israel because you have fought with God and with men and have won. And since we only have a little time left, we've skipped a chapter here or two, but I certainly wanted to end on the chapter, Do You Know This Grace? Because as we've pointed out, all as early as chapter 3 in your book, all the way up to now chapter 12, you can see God's grace going along the way. And I think it is a great way to end and a great way to use this in a study because, Max, there are certainly individuals that may never go into a church. They might come to a small group in a home, and they might be able to relate very well with Jacob. And by the time they get to that last chapter, they might go, I need that grace in my life as well. Yeah. So you have created a book that really could be an evangelistic outreach as well, couldn't it?
I hope so. You're a master in apologetics yourself, Kerby, and you know that the unique feature of our beautiful faith is that we're saved by grace and not by works. Every other religion or philosophy, it says if there is a God, we have to get God's attention. The Christian faith says God has his attention set on us, and we don't have to earn his approval or earn his love. He demonstrated it, that he gave his son for us and died for us while we were still sinners. And so we can trust that. We receive, we don't earn. And we don't climb a ladder. Jesus descended the ladder into our world. And I do think grace is desperately needed in our world today, because if I don't know God loves me, I'm going to have a hard time loving unlovable people. And if I don't think God forgives me, I'm going to have a hard time forgiving myself. But I'm looking forward to heaven because the curse will be gone, and we'll live in that land of grace and live there without it ever being interrupted again.
Let me just mention, we're just almost out of time, but if you go to maxlucado.com, of course, we have that link there as well. You could pre-order the book, but now you'll be able to find it in your bookstore. But you have a new online Bible study. It's a free God Never Gives Up on You online Bible study experience. Understand that it will actually begin in October, so you've got lots of time to actually begin that. And I wanted to really let people know that they can get the book. I think it's going to be excellent for small group study, even for maybe an evangelistic Bible study. But if you wanted to actually follow along with Max Lucado. You have that online Bible study. And let's talk about, in the next minute that we have left, what else is available, because your podcast, your devotional, all sorts of resources are available to our listeners.
Yeah, and curriculum. If you want to do a small group Bible study, we have these videos that are available. There's a variety of equipment, material. Jacob is, I think, an undiscovered story by comparison with Moses and Abraham and Daniel and Joseph. Jacob sometimes flies under the radar. And if you've never studied the life of Jacob or read about the life of Jacob, I think you'll find it fascinating and delightful. And you'll find God. God is the hero of the story. Every page, even when Jacob is at his worst, God is at his best. And so please, I'm urging your listeners now, avail yourself of this beautiful story. It's one that'll touch your heart.
Max Lucado, such a great relationship you and I have had over the years. Thank you so much for being such a faithful friend of Point of View. And I am just so excited about this book. I want to see how it can be used by individuals to reach out with the gospel of grace, which you see even in the book of Genesis. So thank you for being with us today.
It's always a treat. I can't believe how fast the hour goes. Every time I'm amazed. Hey, wait a second. That we're done? Great job, Kerby. Thanks for all you do, and thanks for helping us think in a Christian worldview. We desperately need it.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you appreciated our conversation today. For more information on what we talked about, check out the links in the description of this episode or go to our website, pointofview.net. If you like this episode, follow us, tell a friend, and rate us so that we can continue bringing you the best highlights from Point of View. We'll see you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.